All right. Hello, everybody. Hope you all are doing well. This is DFS Army's tournament strategy show where we will look at last night's slate, see what went well, and then we'll go in today's slate. We'll go game by game. We'll talk through guys we like, guys who are standing out, potential leverage plays, guys that I don't like as much. Then, of course, later today, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll have the pre-lock show, VIP members only, and we'll make it happen on the execution side of things. So let's start off by looking at last night's slate. This was the $100,000 winning lineup. Last night was a pretty good one for me. Wasn't great. I think some guys like Halliburton disappointed, but there wasn't anyone that showed up in this line that we weren't looking at. Cade Cunningham ended up being a little bit lower owned than we thought, so I was over the field on him, which was nice. Mathurin had exposure, didn't force it, but we knew Mathurin was a solid play. I like this game a lot. This Toronto-Indiana game was one that I was trying to focus on, so that worked out. Scotty Barnes, we forced exposure to. He was someone I liked a lot yesterday. Josh Hart showed up a bit, was around field weight, so that wasn't really a surprise. Liked the Knicks a good bit yesterday. Kevin Love is someone that I wished I forced exposure to. I didn't. We talked about him on the pre-lock show. Didn't end up forcing it, though, and so ultimately, I think he was really the guy I ended up missing out on the most. Delon Wright was a core play. We all knew what to do there. Keegan Murray, again, I liked this Miami-Sacramento game, and so had Keegan Murray exposure. No one else really showed up from that game, though, which was disappointing. Bam Adebayo, I had about 80% of. He was a core play and a leverage play, so always nice when that works out. So, yeah, good night last night. But hopefully we can keep it going for today's slate. Thomas, what's up, man? Zolo, good to have y'all here. Appreciate y'all for sticking it out with me. Also, if you guys are liking it, don't forget to like, subscribe, do that thing. Always appreciate the support on that front too. But let's stop the riffraff. Let's get into today's slate. And kind of like yesterday, my favorite game on the slate is this first game, Raptors against the Wizards. I don't really like either of these two teams, but highest total on the slate should be a good game environment. Spread's pretty wide at 10.5 points, but I don't play for blowouts there. Dixon, what's up, man? I like the new profile picture. Appreciate you, man. Hope you're doing all right. Starting off with the Warriors, the important thing here is that we got the news that Andrew Wiggins is going to be sitting out for personal reasons. He did this last year. I guess this is just that time of the year for him. But hopefully it's nothing too serious, you never know. And then Chris Paul is returning. No one is expecting Chris Paul to play too much, but him playing definitely is a bit of a bummer to guys like Klay Thompson. Podziemski should see his usual run, but still not overly excited about him. And then I think some of the guys coming off the bench won't see much more run either. So just messes up things for this team. So some of the excitement I would have had a little bit decreased with Chris Paul returning. But again, I don't expect him to play too much. I remember earlier this season, people calling me stupid for me not loving Chris Paul on this team. Hate to be that guy, but it hasn't worked out so far. But hopefully they get back on track. But anyway, from a DFS standpoint, Stephen Curry at 2% ownership on a 9-game slate. I get he's a streaky shooter. He's never someone that I'm overly excited to play, but no one else is playing him in the best game environment on the slate. I have to do it. He's going to be a leverage play for me tonight for sure. Draymond Green, he's projecting pretty well. He's looking like he's going to be pretty chalky, so he's not going to be sneaky by any means. He's someone that I'm getting exposure to naturally because I'm just letting the DS do its thing. I'm not trying to force too much exposure here, but like I said, best game environment on the slate. So whoever shows up in my lines, I'm not going to X him out or try to lower it. Curry's the only guy I'm going to force in, though. The Wizards, once again, we're in this spot again. Hard to look at these guys too much just yet because we have guys like Denny Avdia questionable, Corey Kispert questionable, Shamit is questionable. There's a pretty solid chance that Jordan Poole ends up starting once again here. Jordan Poole is a very viable play, whether he starts or if he doesn't. But especially if Avdia gets ruled out, Jordan Poole's the guy that I'm looking at. So he's someone that I would force exposure to, especially if he stays this low owned. I like him way more if Avdia gets ruled out, though, and Kispert and Shaman. Just if anyone gets ruled out, he gets a boost. Kyle Kuzma is someone else that I'm going to force exposure to if I have to. I don't have a like on him currently because without the like, he's showing up for me around 50%, which is already really, really good leverage to him. If he doesn't show up, then I'll force exposure or put a like on him to get him to show up a bit more. But at this point, not necessary. Denny Avdia, very, very viable play today, but he's already looking pretty chalky. So ideally, I'll be around field weight. I don't feel like I have to force exposure if he does end up playing. Thankfully, first game on the slate, so not too much to worry about there. And then Tyus Jones, again, good game environment, so he's another guy playing on being at least around field weight exposure, comfortable being a little bit above the field. But all these guys are showing up for me naturally as of right now, so not something I have to over tinker. Like this game, like getting exposure to whoever's in this game, but I'm only forcing Curry and Poole Kuzma as of right now. All right, another day, another Nets being on the slate. Not the biggest fan of the Nets, if you can't tell. Basically, the Nets are just a streaky team. From an injury news standpoint, though, it does make things a little bit more interesting, just in the sense that I know Cam Thomas is listed as TBD. He didn't finish the game yesterday. Ben Simmons has already been ruled out, so that does open things up, especially at the guard position. But there's a lot of games on the slate, so none of these guys feel like must plays. Dennis Schroeder did pretty well yesterday. Definitely looking better with Cam Thomas out. With Ben Simmons not playing, the role is a little bit more solidified as well. So not trying to get away from Dennis Schroeder, but also not going to force exposure there either if I don't have to. And same situation, similar to yesterday, Nick Claxton, solid spot for him at 6,600, but not a guy I'm going to force in on this slate. Looks like DFS is starting to show up a little bit. I would be okay with that if Cam Thomas sits. And then you can always take shots on Bridges, but I can't find a great reason to do that as of right now. This is also lowest total on the slate, so also another reason why I'm not overly excited about it. No, it's the Warriors against the Wizards, right? You're messing with my head a little bit. So, yeah, Draymond versus Poole is a good little narrative going there, and a revenge game for Poole as well. So I don't think Draymond, if he does, that'll be a hell of a call. But I don't think he is. I think if anything, he'll try to be on his best behavior tonight. You have to assume, right? He can't be that into his brand where he fits on it. Yeah, with Cam Thomas out, Dorian Finney-Smith is way more viable. But if Cam Thomas plays today, I'm not trying to go there. Paolo is questionable. Paolo Banchero is questionable. Like I said, he was at shoot around though, so we're expecting him to play, but that can really go either way. Jonathan Isaac is out. Markelle Fultz was not on the injury report, which means I don't really have to worry about too many of these guards today, which is nice. Paolo, if he plays, is really the only viable Magic player for me. He just has a really soft matchup. I can give you some numbers on that. What are we looking at? Orlando. Yeah, the Nets are giving up the 8th most fantasy points to versatile forwards, which Paolo Banchero fits. So he's someone I would say is viable, but again, I think there's just better plays on this slate, so not trying to get too cute with it. This Mavericks versus Cleveland game, I thought I was going to like a lot more, but ultimately, no one's standing out for me too much. Luka Doncic is always viable, always worth mentioning, even in tough matchups. But I like some of the other studs on this slate a bit more. If by the time we get to lock, and by the time we get to the pre-lock show, if I'm able to get a little bit of exposure to Luka, you all know I'll do like a 5% min or something like that. But at least as of right now, he's just not a high priority for me. And the same story goes for the rest of these guys. For the Cavs, this is the first time in a while I'm not going to play Donovan Mitchell. And it's really just because of the matchup. Don't love it. And then this team's healthy now. And so when the Cavs are healthy, they're a little bit tougher to predict. I think Jared Allen is definitely still very viable at 7,300. Price tag is just nice. Matchup is still solid against the Mavs. Evan Mobley is also someone I'm okay with. I know he disappointed us a good bit last time, but don't hate going there. I'm looking at Mobley as a potential leverage play, but again, there's just other plays I like a bit more on this slate, and I don't love Garland or LeVert here in this spot. Price tag and matchup wise, again, when they're healthy, I just don't love the Cavs. Sixers, this team is not looking good ever since Joel Embiid fell down. They really have just been struggling. Uh, Outside of Embiid, though, KJ Martin's questionable. Covington has been out. No real injury news that makes this team overly exciting. Outside of your dart throws, you can take on guys like Maxey, Harris, and Hield. But ultimately, they're not standing out for me, so I'm not taking shots here. Price tag on Harris is starting to go down a little bit again, though. Get a little bit of a better matchup, I'm going to take a shot, but I don't love picking on the Celtics. Their defense is pretty solid. Now, what we can do is pick on the Sixers. I forgot who commented it yesterday, but they were like, hey, we can pick on the Sixers. They're my team, but they've been god-awful ever since Embiid has been out, and that's true. The problem for me is with the Celtics, they're healthy. And when they're healthy, they can be a little bit tougher to predict. Hard for me to pay up to 9,800 on Tatum when there's other guys like just as much, like Edwards. But also Edwards is a cheaper option, but also guys like Giannis who are in really good spots. Jaylen Brown, similar. He has upside, but nothing's really standing out too much for me from a matchup perspective. I just like their low ownership. Porzingis has the soft matchup going up against the Sixers without Embiid. So he's someone that I plan on trying to get close to field weight exposure on. I didn't realize he's going to be this chalky, but I would like to at least be around 10-15%. And then Holiday has a really soft matchup here as well. And he's a little bit cheaper than White, which kind of gives me a little bit more of a lean towards him. But he's someone that is showing up a little bit naturally, just around 3%. I haven't made the decision on if I'm going to force it or not with him. But if I had to make a decision right now, I would. But I want to kind of take a wait and see approach to see if we get any more value at the guard position where I might not have to play Drew. All right. A few more games left. We have the Jazz going up against the Hawks. Yeah. Kyrie revenge game. You're not wrong. Going up against the Nets. Yeah, could be a little interesting. Zolo said Tyrese Halliburton's dad broke Luka's hand. I did not see that. That's crazy, actually. Yeah, Mobley's he's always under-owned in my opinion, but I get it. He disappointed last time. It does make me a little bit nervous, but I like it. Yeah, hard to not like the Celtics today. You liking Holiday though, Zolo? Kind of makes me feel a little bit better about maybe putting a min on him if I have to, but hopefully he'll show up the right amount when we are on the pre-lock show, so don't have to worry about that. Next up, we have the Jazz going up against the Hawks. This game has the second highest total on the slate, which of course means I'm going to force exposure to it. We know the Jazz can be a little tough to predict, especially when they're all pretty much healthy. Otto Porter Jr. isn't with the team right now, but that doesn't really change too much for me. The main people I'm looking at here is Lauri Markkanen. He's really the only guy I'm going to force in as of right now. And I got to Markkanen because the Hawks are allowing the second most fantasy points allowed in the league to forwards like Markkanen, and so makes it pretty easy for me. I don't know if he'll be a leverage play for me. I doubt I can put a 30% min on him on this slate, but I do want to be over the field on Markkanen. I like the spot for him a lot. I also like playing guards against the Hawks. Problem is Utah has a crap ton of guards that they utilize, and it really just depends on who ends up having the hot hand that night. As of right now, I'm not planning on forcing exposure here, but I am getting a little bit of exposure to Sexton, Clarkson, and George. Ideally, it stays that way, but there's no one that I'm really feeling like I have to play here. Just I just want a mixture of some of these guys, making marketing the focal point for me. All right, for the Atlanta Hawks, we have Trae Young out, which definitely opens things up a lot for this team. Is why you're probably seeing a lot of Hawks in your lines if you're running early. DeJounte Murray is the guy in this spot. It's pretty obvious at 8,900. I wish he was a little cheaper, but it makes so much sense. The Jazz are not a defense we have to worry about. Johnson, I have some interest in, really just his low ownership. Looking at him as like a potential leverage play, more likely than that, though. I'll probably just be slightly over the field. Bogdanovich sees a nice increase in usage. Not surprised he's showing up a lot. Sadiq Bey is also someone else I want exposure to. And DeAndre Hunter. DeAndre Hunter comes off the bench, but he sees and he's been playing more consistent minutes when Young is out. So little bit of value at 5,300, but he's not that cheap where I feel like I have to have him. He's just someone I feel like is worth taking a shot on. So ideally, I'll just be a little bit around field weight. Bruno is showing up a lot for me right now. Again, his minutes are all over the place, so I don't feel fantastic about Bruno. As of right now, he's showing up in way too many of my lines. 57% of my lines. I will lower that. He's not going to be in 57% of my lines tonight, but he's showing up and he'll be there. Anyone else? Capella is fine. I never really get overly excited about Capella. Bobby Shaw said, do you set maximums? I do set maximums, but it's not something I plan out ahead of time. I just run the domination station, especially as we get closer to lock and everyone sees it on the pre-lock show where I'll put like an 80% cap or sometimes like a 50, 40% cap where I can still get a little bit of leverage on certain players, but I don't have to have 80% of guys I don't trust. So those are usually the situations where I'll set maximums, but it's not something I can really see coming. It's just whenever me and the optimizer don't agree, I just force my own will. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. It just depends. For the Pelicans, we have a decent amount of injury news that will impact this slate pretty dramatically, in my opinion. First and foremost, my guy, Zion Williamson, is listed as questionable. We all know that matters a lot. CJ McCollum is also listed as questionable. That will also impact things a lot. And then Jose Alvarado is still suspended. I mean, hard to talk about this team too much, but of course, if Zion and or CJ get ruled out, we're playing the Pelicans tonight. If they both play, seems like a pretty soft, easy fade for me. But I'm expecting at least one of them to sit, to be honest. For the Knicks, no new injury news here. I don't love picking on the Pelicans. These guys also played last night. Not trying to go here. I'm always okay with a little bit of Brunson if you want to take a shot, but back end of a back-to-back, not overly excited about that. And Josh Hart is looking like he's okay, but again, not trying to chase that after last night. It went well yesterday, but not trying to do it again today. Pistons against the Bulls, you can tell, solid game environment at 225, not bad. Spread at 11 is a little concerning, but I don't play for blowouts, so just something to kind of keep in the back of your head to probably not go too crazy on this game. But for the Pistons, where are we with news? Let's see here. Pistons only have Sasser listed as out, which doesn't really impact things too much for me. Cade Cunningham, that play came through last game. He's still really cheap for the upside he has. I don't love playing Cade Cunningham on the back end of a back-to-back, but if he's only going to be in single-digit ownership, I basically have to. Let me check the sim model, see if it likes him at all. Doesn't love him. I don't think Cade's a bad play, though. And if he's going to be 6% owned, I want to be a little bit closer to field weight exposure on him. Duran, I don't feel like I have to have at 6,900 against the Bulls tonight. Not really looking at any of the other Pistons either. Chicago, they're the ones that have the golden matchup. They're also without Torrey Craig. Levine's gone for the season. Patrick Williams is gone for the season. These guys are struggling a little bit from a health standpoint. But everyone's stupid cheap for a fantastic matchup. It terrifies the absolute hell out of me because the spread is so wide. If this game gets out of hand, things can get ugly really fast. But assuming and knowing this Bulls team isn't that dominant typically, I'm okay eating this chalk. Vucevic is really one of the Bulls I like the most. I just like playing bigs against the Pistons. DeMar DeRozan showing up for me a lot. He's the one I'm probably the most back and forth on, where I don't feel like I have to have 80% of him. Ideally, I'll just be slightly over the field. So he's what I'm looking at the most at lowering some ownership to, but still plan on being over the field. Kobe White has been lacking a little bit of that upside, but he's shown a little bit of signs of that still coming back. So at 7,400, he's definitely still very viable. He's showing up in a lot of my lines right now. AO, we know he had a strong game. He's been in pretty solid form here recently too, and I think a lot of that has to do with Torrey Craig and Patrick Williams getting ruled out and being out for a while. He's really starting to shine in a little bit of an expanded role, and the minutes have been there. So he scares me. He can go out there and just do a lot of cardio sometimes, but like you said, AO, he's popping in the DS and the Sim. It's hard for me to find a great reason not to play him at this point. Random question. Who's your favorite player in the NBA right now? It's weird, Zolo. It used to be Jokic, but I'm just not a big fan of his attitude and lack of care. So he's kind of fallen off for me a good bit. It might be, I don't know. I don't have a true favorite player right now, but I have a lot of players I like, which is why I like DFS. So cheat answer, but it's true. I don't have a favorite right now. Agreed, Steve. Congrats last night. I saw you did pretty well. What's up, Mo? Hope you're doing all right. So yeah, I like the Bulls. They make me nervous. They make sense to me. Alex Caruso is very viable as well. Not playing Drummond, and Terry and Carter are okay if you're really playing for a blowout, but that's not the way I'm gonna do it. Spurs, I've been on the Victor Wembanyama train really since the beginning, so I'm just going to keep that going at super low ownership. Matchup is tough here. The matchup is not great going up against the Timberwolves these days. We're not getting a discount on Victor either, so I understand why people aren't playing him. Ultimately, I'm just not overly concerned. Victor's pretty consistently been hitting at least 50 points. We need a bit more than 50 for him to take down a tournament for us, but he's had like 60, 70 point upside games. I don't really expect him to get there for us tonight, but at super low ownership, me having a 5% min on someone who has upside like Victor is fine. And that's a way I typically like to play, is just taking shots on these low-owned guys who can do well in tough matchups. But he's not someone I'm going to go to bat for, like, hey, you have to play him. Great spot. Because that's not the case. It's just an ownership play. Rest of the Spurs, they show up. Naturally, I'm okay with it, but I'm not forcing any of these guys in. Rotation's too wide these days for them. Spread is concerning with the Timberwolves. The chance of a blowout happening relatively high here, but hopefully the Spurs can keep it close. I think the blowout concern is why guys like Anthony Edwards are pretty low owned, but Edwards is one of my favorite plays on the slate because of the matchup, because of the upside, but the concerning part is we need this game to stay close. So not someone I'm going to go crazy on, but he will be a leverage play for me, which means I'll be at least double the field. So probably around 10, 15%, somewhere around that. Cat is viable here as well. I mean, I think the big thing here is Rudy Gobert being questionable. If Gobert plays, then not really overly interested in Cat, but if he's out, then Karl-Anthony Towns is a focal point for me. Conley's fine. Soft matchup, but I never get overly excited about Conley. As of right now, he's showing up around 5%. I'm okay with that. I don't feel like I need to force him in, but by the time we get to the pre-lock show, I expect him to probably be a little bit higher just naturally. And then last game on the slate might be one of my favorite games on the slate, at least for the Milwaukee side of things. This is another situation where we need this game to stay close for any of these guys to really be overly viable. The Milwaukee Bucks have improved a lot defensively over the last few games. So there's not really anyone that I feel like, oh, they're in a fantastic spot. I do feel like Brandon Miller is a little cheap at 6,800. It's not the cheapest we've seen him, but at least he's not in like that 7,700 range that he was in for a little bit there. And so at super low ownership, I was debating between Bridges and Miller here. Bridges is always worth talking about just because he does so much for this team and has a lot of upside. Brandon Miller, I almost said to use Zolo as one of my favorite NBA players in the league right now because he's just so fun to watch. But even outside of me just liking Miller, is really just his price tag and low ownership in a matchup that's not awful. That makes me want to have some exposure to him tonight. So he's also another potential leverage play. Trey has been in good form, but I think we just have better value on the slate. You can do better or you can do worse than Mishik. And so at 4K, I'm fine with him. He's looking really chalky, so I'm not going to force him in or anything like that, but he just makes a lot of sense on this slate. He's also just been playing pretty consistent minutes. He's been a pretty decent points per minute player. So, again, you can do worse, but he's not someone that you should start your lines with. He comes off the bench. Hopefully that's enough of like a little warning as to why he's not like a must play or anything, even though he's seeing decent ownership. Yeah, I like him too. I see where you're seeing TJ a little bit. Towns has been really good lately. If Gobert gets ruled out, so much more fun. I didn't talk about Grant, but he's also someone that I've started to like a lot more too. Really, I just keep waiting for like a really soft matchup, but the Hornets have not had great matchups lately. 4,600, not awful. I just wish he would play a little bit more, but they have a lot of bodies. So yeah, you can definitely do worse. I don't think I'm gonna play Grant Williams tonight, to be honest. But I don't think he's like a dumb play or anything. For the Bucks, this side of things is a bit more interesting because the Hornets are the bad team and they're not a great defensive team. Their pace can be a little questionable sometimes, which can sometimes not create the best fantasy point environments. But you know what I do? I play bigs against the Hornets because they give up the most fantasy points in the league still to centers. So Brook Lopez is someone that I'm definitely looking at here. Damian Lillard, great matchup. Again, just needed to stay close. Exact same story for Giannis. Giannis is my favorite. It's between like Giannis and Victor and Curry for really like my top pay up options. And Edwards is in the mix too. So like, those are my main four. So he's just really one of the guys who are one of my top 4 pay up options on the slate. Lillard, I'm wanting to be at least around field weight exposure on, but I don't feel like he needs to be a core player or anything like that. And then Brook Lopez, similar story. I just want to be around field weight. Would love to be slightly higher too. So interesting slate, guys. A lot of news that we're waiting on that will dramatically impact things per usual, but we will see. Yeah, so believe it or not, the Hornets are not the best defense in the NBA right now. Yeah, you're not wrong about that. So yeah, that's pretty much everything for me. We'll have everything way more hunkered down and locked in by the time we get to the pre-lock show. Again, that show's all about execution. We'll talk about mins, maxes, that kind of thing. No show tomorrow. I have work stuff. No show on Thursday. I have work stuff. I'll be back on Friday. So hopefully we can make good things happen today and then come back on Friday and wrap up the week on a good note. Appreciate you all. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.